2 children, 3 years, one secret that just walked back into the storm. She ran from the most dangerous man she'd ever loved, and she took the only thing that could destroy them both. For 3 years, Elena Hart built a life out of nothing. No safety net, no backup plan. Just 2 babies, 2 jobs, and a silence she kept like a wound pressed shut with bare hands. Then the rain came. Then the black SUVs. Then him. If you've ever loved someone who felt like both your salvation and your cage, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The rain hit Caldwell Street like something personal. It wasn't the slow, cinematic kind that softened edges and made the world look poetic. It was cold and sideways and mean, the kind that found the gap between your collar and your neck and stayed there. Elena Hart pulled her jacket tighter around the double stroller with both hands, which meant she had nothing left to hold her hood down, so it kept blowing back and soaking her hair flat against her skull. She didn't stop moving. She couldn't afford to stop moving. Emma was burning up. She'd checked her daughter's forehead 3 times in the last 6 blocks. Pressed her wrist to it, the way her own mother used to do, back when Elena still had a mother to call when things went sideways. 102. Maybe 103 now. The thermometer was back in the apartment because she'd grabbed the stroller and the diaper bag and her last $47, and she'd left everything else, including the thermometer, including her umbrella, including what felt like the last scrap of dignity she'd been holding on to since February. Lucas was quiet in his side of the stroller. That was the thing about Lucas. He'd been quiet since the day he was born. He watched everything with those dark, serious eyes, and he didn't complain. Elena wasn't sure if that made things easier or broke her heart more completely. The pharmacy was 2 blocks ahead. She could see the Red Cross sign bleeding neon into the wet pavement. She pushed harder. The wheels of the stroller were cheap, and one of them had a slow wobble that pulled left if she didn't correct it every few feet. She corrected it constantly, automatically, the way you learn to compensate for things that are broken when you can't afford to replace them. The way Elena had learned to compensate for a lot of things. She was 29 years old and she felt 60. That wasn't self-pity. That was just Tuesday. She made it half a block before the traffic stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Like someone had thrown a switch. The intersection at 5th and Caldwell went silent in the way that cities almost never go silent. Not the absence of sound, but the compression of it. Everything pulling back at once. Cars braking. A bus hissing to a halt. A cab driver leaning out his window to look ahead, and then leaning back in without saying anything, because even he understood that whatever was blocking the street wasn't something you honked at. 4 black SUVs. No. 5. The 5th one she saw when the first 4 fanned out in a formation that was too clean and too deliberate to be an accident. They weren't police. They didn't have the look of police. They had something else entirely, something that came from money so old and so deep it had stopped needing to announce itself. The vehicles were matte black in that specific way that costs more than most people make in a year. The men who stepped out of the side doors moved with the quiet efficiency of people who have done difficult things in difficult places and don't carry it visibly anymore. Elena stopped walking, her hands locked on the stroller handles. Something in her chest, some animal thing that lived below thought, below language, recognized the shape of what was happening before her brain caught up. The body knows. That's what nobody tells you. The body remembers what the mind is still arguing about. The rear door of the center SUV opened. He stepped out. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she just spent 3 years compressing him in her memory into something smaller and more manageable. Adrian Blackwell didn't look like money the way rich men usually did. No flashy watch, no studied casualness, no performance of ease. He wore a dark coat, collar up against the rain, and he stood the way he always stood, like the ground beneath him was a resource he was deciding whether or not to acquire. He said something to the man beside him without looking at him. The man nodded and moved immediately. Elena didn't breathe. She thought, don't look up. Don't look up. If you don't look up, he won't. He looked up. Not at her. Not yet. His gaze moved across the blocked intersection with the flat efficiency of a man assessing a room, cataloging exits and variables, a habit so deep it had become reflex. He looked at the cab, at the bus, at the small cluster of pedestrians huddled under an awning across the street. Then his eyes moved to the woman with the stroller. Elena watched it happen, watched his gaze land on her and start to slide past and then catch, the way a hook catches. Not violent, just certain. She saw the exact moment his expression changed, not dramatically. Adrian Blackwell had spent 20 years learning to keep his face still in boardrooms and crisis situations and contract negotiations that could ruin men. But she had spent 4 years learning the specific geography of that face, every fault line and pressure point, and she saw it. The stillness, the kind that happens right before everything moves at once. He saw her hair first, she thought, or the line of her jaw, or just the shape of her in the rain, something his body remembered before his mind did, the same way hers had recognized the SUVs. Then his gaze dropped to the stroller, then to the two small faces inside it, Emma with her fever-flushed cheeks and her dark curls matted against her forehead, Lucas with his serious eyes fixed on Adrian with an expression of pure calm assessment that was so familiar it made Elena's stomach drop straight through the pavement. She watched Adrian Blackwell look at his son's face for the first time. She watched him understand. It took maybe 4 seconds, maybe less. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name and didn't want to. He took one step toward her. Just one, measured and deliberate. And then he stopped himself, which was the most frightening thing she'd ever seen him do, because Adrian didn't stop himself. Adrian didn't pace himself. Adrian moved toward what he wanted with the relentless forward pressure of something geological. The fact that he stopped meant he was thinking. The fact that he was thinking meant he was planning. Elena! His voice carried across the rain without effort, without volume, without any of the things voices usually need to cross distance. It just arrived, the way it always had. She didn't answer. Elena. Quieter this time, which was somehow worse. She made the calculation in about half a second. Run. Where? With a stroller and a feverish 2-year-old and $47? Stand and fight and say what exactly to the man whose face her daughter wore like a reflection? Play it casual? As if casual was a setting she still had access to after 3 years of surviving on coffee and sheer stubbornness? She lifted her chin. Emma has a fever, she said. I need to get to the pharmacy. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't a greeting. It was the only true thing she had available that also served as a wall. Adrian looked at Emma. His expression shifted into something that wasn't quite readable, not the cold calculation she'd braced for, something raw and less managed than that. He turned back to her. Which pharmacy? The one you're blocking. A beat of silence. Behind him, one of his security team said something quietly into an earpiece. Adrian didn't look at them. Clear the intersection, he said. Just that. No volume, no theater. 3 of the SUVs moved within 30 seconds. Elena hated how efficiently it happened. She hated how easily the world rearranged itself around him, the way it always had, like gravity, like weather, like something you didn't argue with. She pushed the stroller forward. Her hands were shaking and she gripped the handles harder to hide it. She made it about 8 feet before he fell into step beside her. Don't, she said. She needs a doctor, not a pharmacist. She needs children's Tylenol and sleep. I know my daughter. The word landed between them, deliberate and barbed. My. She felt him absorb it. Elena, don't say my name again right now. She kept walking. I mean it. Give me 1 block. He gave it to her. He walked beside her in silence for exactly 1 block, hands in his coat pockets, rain hitting his shoulders, and Elena felt the surreal wrongness of it pressing against her from all sides. The man she'd spent 3 years running from, walking next to her like it was nothing, like time was a thing that happened to other people. They reached the pharmacy. She pushed through the door. The fluorescent lights were aggressive, and the warmth hit her face, and her eyes stung, and she would not cry. Not now, not here, not with him 3 feet behind her. A clerk started toward them. Adrian said something so quietly Elena couldn't hear it, but the clerk turned around and disappeared into the back. And when Elena looked up, the store was emptying, smoothly, quickly. Customers drifting out like they'd all suddenly remembered somewhere else to be. Stop doing that, she said. She has a fever. He crouched down in front of the stroller, in front of Emma. His voice dropped to something Elena had never heard from him before, careful in the way of someone touching something they're afraid to break. Hey, What's your name? Emma stared at him with the bold, unashamed assessment of a 2-year-old. Emmy. Emmy. He said it like he was memorizing it. You feeling bad? Emma considered this with great seriousness. My head is hot. I know. We're going to fix that. Elena's jaw tightened. You don't get to make promises to my children. He stood slowly, turned to face her, and for the first time since the intersection, they were close enough that she could see what 3 years had done to him. The lines around his eyes were deeper. There was something exhausted underneath the composure, a weight that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who had spent a long time waiting for something he'd decided he was never going to get. How long has she had the fever? He asked. Since this morning. And the boy, Lucas is fine. Has he been in contact with... I said he's fine. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated herself for it. She turned to the shelves. Children's fever reducer. She knew exactly where to look. She'd bought it enough times to find it in the dark. She grabbed the right dosage, grabbed a bottle of water, brought it to the register where no one was standing because everyone had been quietly evaporated by the force of Adrian Blackwell's presence, the way unpleasant things always were. She pulled out her wallet, her $47. Put it away, and he said behind her, absolutely not. Elena, I said no. She put 2 20s and a 5 on the empty counter and stood there waiting for someone to come take them. This is what I do. This is what I've been doing. You don't get to show up in the rain and start paying for things and think that changes anything. Silence. Then, how long have you been doing it alone? She didn't answer. From the beginning? Something shifted in his voice, not softness. He didn't do softness, or hadn't, or she'd told herself he hadn't because it was easier. Elena, did you know before you left? The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, the rain kept hammering the glass. Lucas had fallen asleep in the stroller, his head tipped sideways, one small hand curled open in his lap. Emma was watching Adrian with the fearless curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned what men like him cost. Elena picked up her change. We're leaving, she said. I have a physician on call. He can be at your... He stopped, recalibrated. He can come to wherever you are. Tonight. It's not a negotiation, it's just... She has a fever and she's 2 years old and you look like you haven't slept in 3 days. She turned to face him. 4, she said. It's been 4 days. Because Lucas had an ear infection last week and I was at the clinic with him until 2 in the morning and then I had a 6 a.m. shift and then Emma got whatever this is and there's no one, Adrian. There's no one else. That's what I chose. That's what I chose when I left. She hadn't meant to say that much. It came out with the velocity of something that had been pressurized for too long in too small a space. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. She watched him choose his words with the same precision he used in rooms where billions changed hands. I know you had reasons, he said. I'm not asking you to justify them, not tonight. Then what are you asking? Let the doctor come, just tonight. Then you can go back to whatever you've built, and I won't... He stopped again. His throat moved. I'll give you tonight to figure out what comes next. Elena looked at her daughter. Emma's eyes were half closed now, the fever dragging at her. She looked at Lucas, asleep, peaceful, his face a quiet echo of the man standing 3 feet away. She thought about the walk back through the rain, the apartment that was cold because she hadn't paid the heating supplement this month, the medicine that would take 40 minutes to kick in, and the night stretched out ahead of her, alone, measuring temperature with her wrist. She thought about what it meant to say yes to anything Adrian Blackwell offered. She thought about what it cost. One night, she said finally. The doctor comes, checks her out, and then you leave us alone. That's the deal. That's the deal, he said. She didn't believe him. That was the thing about Elena Hart. Even exhausted, even undone, even standing in a pharmacy with wet hair and $47 and 2 sick babies, some part of her never stopped watching, never stopped cataloging, never stopped knowing that a man like Adrian didn't accept deals with exits built into them. A man like Adrian looked at a deal with an exit and saw a door he hadn't opened yet. She just didn't have the luxury of refusing. She pushed the stroller toward the door. He moved ahead of her, opened it, held it. The rain was still coming down. One of the black SUVs had pulled to the curb. I can walk, she said. It's 4 blocks and she has a fever. Elena stood in the doorway of the pharmacy with the rain at her back and the warm light dying behind her, and the man she'd run from holding a car door open with an expression that wasn't winning, wasn't triumphant, wasn't any of the things she'd rehearsed being angry at. He just looked tired. He looked like someone who had finally found what he'd stopped letting himself look for. She got in the car, and the moment the door closed behind her, quiet and precise and final as a vault, Elena Hart understood that she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. Not because Adrian would force anything, not tonight, not yet, but because she had looked at his face when he saw Lucas, and she had seen something break open in him, something that had been sealed for a long time, and she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had loved him once completely, that a man like Adrian Blackwell didn't break open and then let go. He broke open, and then he rebuilt. And this time, he was going to rebuild around them. Outside the window, Caldwell Street slid past in the rain. The neon pharmacy cross reflected in the wet asphalt and then was gone. Emma stirred against her side, fever warm and small. Lucas slept on. Adrian sat across from her in the rear seats, not speaking, not pushing, not doing anything except existing in the same space. But Elena could feel the shift in the atmosphere the way you feel pressure changing before a storm. Something had ended tonight. Something else had begun. She just didn't know yet what it was going to cost her to survive it. The SUV smelled like leather and money and something else Elena couldn't name. Some absence of desperation, maybe? Some fundamental lack of the low-grade anxiety that had soaked into every surface of her life for the past 3 years. The seats were heated. She noticed that before she noticed anything else, the warmth coming up through the back of her thighs, and she hated how good it felt. Hated the way her body responded to basic comfort, like it was something miraculous instead of something that used to be ordinary. Emma had stopped fussing. The warmth and the motion had done what Elena's arms couldn't anymore, quieted her into a heavy, fever-drowsy stillness, her head against her mother's ribs, her small fingers wrapped around the strap of the diaper bag. Lucas hadn't moved. He slept the way he always slept, completely, without reservation, like sleep was a country he trusted completely. Elena kept her eyes on the window. Adrian sat across from her and didn't speak, and she felt every second of his silence as a kind of pressure, not aggressive, not demanding, just present. That was the thing she'd forgotten, or tried to forget. How much space he occupied without doing anything. How a room reorganized itself around him, not because he forced it, but because something in him simply required it. The city moved past. Wet streets, closed storefronts, a man in a yellow slicker walking a dog that wanted to stop at every puddle. Normal things. The kind of things Elena had spent 3 years deliberately surrounding herself with because normal was safe, and safe was survival, and survival was the only metric that mattered. She'd been doing fine. She needed him to understand that. She needed to understand it herself. The SUV stopped in front of a building she recognized. Not the Blackwell Tower, not his corporate address, but the private residence on Hargrove Avenue, the one she'd been to exactly once, early in their relationship, when she still thought she was understanding him rather than being absorbed by him. 12 floors. Private elevator. A penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a controlled environment. "I said the doctor could come," she said, not moving. "I didn't say we were coming here." "The doctor is already here." He held her gaze. "It's the most efficient option." Efficient? She said the word like she was examining something she'd found under a rock. "That's what this is." "Elena." "My apartment is 11 minutes from the pharmacy. The doctor could have met us there." "Your apartment doesn't have—" He stopped. "Doesn't have what?" She said it quietly, dangerously. "Say it." A beat. "The resources to manage a sick child through the night comfortably." She laughed. It came out shorter and harder than she intended, not a real laugh, the kind that happens when something hits a bruise. "Resources." "Okay." She looked at Emma, at Lucas. She made the calculation the same way she always made calculations now. Not what she wanted, not what felt right, but what they needed. What the math said. "1 night," she said again. "1 night," he confirmed. She got out of the car. She didn't take his hand when he offered it. She pulled the stroller out herself, assembled it on the wet sidewalk herself, settled Lucas in it herself. Adrian stood back and let her do it, and she told herself that was good, that was respect, and not just the patience of a man who is very good at waiting for the right moment. The elevator was exactly as she remembered. Smooth, silent, mirrors on 3 walls. Elena stared at the floor numbers and not at her own reflection because she already knew what she'd see. A woman who looked like she'd been wrung out and hung up wet. Mascara that had gone AWOL, somewhere between the apartment and Caldwell Street. A jaw set so tight it was starting to ache. The penthouse doors opened directly into the main living area. It was all glass and clean lines and the kind of deliberate emptiness that cost more than clutter. A man was already waiting near the hallway. 50s, silver-haired, a medical bag, the specific unhurried competence of someone who got called to places like this regularly. He looked at Elena once, assessed the situation without drama, and crouched down to Emma's level. "Hi there. I'm Dr. Reeves. Can I take a look at you?" Emma looked at her mother first. Elena nodded. Emma allowed it. Elena stepped back and watched the exam and kept her breathing even and her hands still, and she did not think about the fact that Dr. Reeves was better equipped than the clinic where she'd taken Lucas at 2 a.m. last week, where they'd waited 4 hours on plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, while Lucas tugged at his ear and Elena calculated whether she could afford the copay. She did not think about that. She watched the doctor work. Adrian stood near the kitchen island, far enough to give them space, close enough to see everything. Elena was aware of him the way you're aware of a temperature change, not looking directly at it, but registering it in your skin. "Viral," Dr. Reeves said after several minutes. "Classic presentation. Temp is 102.4. Nothing bacterial, no ear involvement, lungs clear. Children's ibuprofen, fluids, rest. She'll be uncomfortable for another day, maybe 2, but she's healthy." He glanced up. "You did the right things." Elena absorbed that. The smallest, most embarrassing wave of relief that someone qualified was telling her she hadn't missed anything, hadn't failed at the most fundamental job she had. "Thank you," she said. Flat, controlled. Dr. Reeves packed his bag, said something quietly to Adrian near the door, and was gone. And then they were alone. Elena busied herself with Emma, found the guest bathroom, a ridiculous thing with heated floors and a soaking tub she could have fit her entire apartment kitchen into, and she ran a lukewarm bath the way she always did when Emma had a fever, talking low and steady while Emma splashed listlessly and Lucas sat on the bath mat and stacked the decorative soaps into a tower with the focused concentration of a tiny engineer. She could hear Adrian somewhere in the apartment. Footsteps. The low sound of his voice on a call, brief and clipped, ending quickly. The kettle. She didn't know what to do with the fact that he was making tea or whatever it was, and existing in the same square footage as her children, occupying the space that belonged to his absence so completely that his presence in it felt like a fault line shifting. She got Emma dried and into a spare shirt from the diaper bag. She always packed extra everything, always, because that was the kind of mother she'd had to become, and settled her on the guest bed with the ibuprofen dissolved in a small cup of juice. Emma took it without argument, which meant she felt worse than she was letting on. That was Emma. Already at 2 years old, already trying not to be a burden. Elena didn't know where she'd learned that, and it made something ache behind her sternum every time she saw it. "Stay with Emmy," she told Lucas. He nodded seriously and sat cross-legged on the bed beside his sister like a small sentry. She walked back out to the main room. Adrian was at the kitchen island. 2 mugs. He pushed one toward her without asking. She stopped 6 feet away, looked at the mug, looked at him. "How long did you know?" he asked. So they were doing this now. "Which part?" she said. "Any of it. All of it." His hands were flat on the counter. She noticed the tension in them, the deliberate stillness, a man holding himself very carefully in place. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" 3 weeks after I left." Something moved through his expression, fast, gone. "So you knew and you didn't—" "I left before I knew." She crossed her arms. Not defensive, bracing. "That matters." "Does it?" "Yes, Adrian, it does." She pulled out one of the bar stools and sat down because she was so tired her knees were starting to feel unreliable and she would not have this conversation at a structural disadvantage. "I left because of what we were becoming, what you were making us. I found out I was pregnant afterward and I made a decision." "You made a decision." He said it very quietly. I made the only decision I could make that felt like protecting them. Protecting them. He looked at her directly then. From me. The word sat between them, the real one, the one they were dancing around. She didn't look away. Yes, she said. The sound he made wasn't a word. It was short and controlled, and it came from somewhere below his composure, something that had been waiting behind the professionalism and the patience since the moment on Caldwell Street. He turned away from her, one hand going to the back of his neck, and she watched him work through it. Not the explosion she might have expected, something harder to manage than an explosion. I looked for you, he said, not turning back, for 8 months. Every resource I had. I know. He turned. You know. I found out about 6 months in. Someone I'd worked with in the city mentioned they'd been asked about me. She kept her voice steady. I moved again. You ran from the search. I ran from you. The search was you. Elena, I thought you were dead. The word came out fractured, just slightly, the first real crack in the surface. I thought you'd been taken, or hurt, or I thought someone had gotten to you because of my business, because of the people I dealt with. I thought the last conversation we had was the last conversation I would ever have with you. She thought about that. She made herself think about it, made herself hold it instead of deflecting, because she wasn't a person who deflected, not even when it would have been easier. I'm sorry, she said. For that part, I should have found a way to let you know I was alive. But not where you were. No. He stared at her. Why? Because you would have come. Of course I would have come. That's why. She uncrossed her arms and put her hands flat on the counter, mirroring him without meaning to, two people on opposite sides of something trying to find solid ground. You would have come, Adrian, and you would have been certain you were doing the right thing. You would have been certain with every single piece of yourself. And that certainty, she stopped, steadied. That certainty was what I couldn't survive anymore. The way you loved me left no room for me to exist inside it. Does that make sense? You loved me like an acquisition. The silence that followed was long enough to have weight. I know, he said finally. She hadn't expected that. I know that's what I did. He said it without looking for absolution, which was either genuine growth or the most sophisticated manipulation she'd ever seen, and she couldn't tell yet which one it was, and that uncertainty was its own kind of vertigo. I've had 3 years to understand what I did wrong. I had nothing else to do with the time. Don't. She picked up the mug just to have something to do with her hands. The tea was too hot to drink. She held it anyway. Don't make this a redemption pitch. I can't sit here and be sold something right now. I'm not selling anything. You're always selling something. You were built to sell things. A beat. Something shifted in his eyes that might have been, in a different man, humor. That's possibly fair. It's completely fair. She set the mug down. Emma looks like you. Lucas looks like you. I have spent 2 years watching your face and my children's faces, and I know every version of the expression you're wearing right now because I watched you wear it in every negotiation I ever sat across from you in. You're calculating. You're patient. You're deciding which move to make first. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me I'm wrong. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. You're not wrong, he said, but the calculation this time isn't about winning. Then what's it about? Not losing them before they know I exist. She sat back. The honesty of it caught her off guard, which meant either it was real or he'd gotten significantly better at this, and both possibilities scared her for different reasons. You don't get to just walk into their lives, she said, because you saw them in the rain and decided. They're not a position you can take in the market, Adrian. They're people. They're 2 years old and they've never had a father, and that is a wound they are going to carry, and you don't get to heal it on your timeline. What's your timeline? I don't have one. That's the point. Elena. He said her name differently than he had on the street. Not the controlled deployment of it. Something rougher underneath. I'm not asking to take over. I'm asking to exist in their lives, as their father. And if I say no? The pause was very small, but she caught it. Then I'll be asking again tomorrow, he said, and the day after. There it was. The wall behind the patients. She'd been waiting for it, testing for it, and there it was. Not a threat. Never a threat with Adrian, something more fundamental than a threat. A fact, a gravitational constant. He would not stop. She stood up from the stool. I need to check on Emma. I know. He didn't move. There's a room at the end of the hall. Both beds are made. He stopped. I had the whole floor guessed ready about a year ago, after I stopped looking. Something in his voice flattened slightly on that last part, pressed down on itself. I don't know why I kept it ready. Old habit. Elena looked at him for a moment. Really looked the way she'd avoided doing on the street, in the car since the pharmacy. The lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders, which had always been rigid but differently now. Not the rigidity of control, but the rigidity of something load-bearing, a man who had been holding something up for a long time alone. She thought, this changes nothing. She thought, I am so tired. She walked down the hall. She checked Emma, sleeping, temperature already edging down, the ibuprofen doing its job. She checked Lucas, still awake, building a new soap tower on the nightstand, unbothered by everything, the most self-contained human being Elena had ever met, and she'd been watching him since before he was born. She sat on the edge of the bed. Lucas looked at her with Adrian's eyes. Mama tired? He said. Yeah, baby. She pressed her face into the top of his head for a moment, breathed him in, soap and warm skin and the particular smell of him that was irreducible and entirely his own. Mama's tired. He patted her arm with his small hand. 2 years old and already trying to give something back. She held it together with her back teeth. She sat in the chair beside the bed until both children were asleep. Then she sat longer than that, because the chair was between her and the rest of the apartment, between her and the conversation she was going to have to finish, and she was in no hurry. It was close to midnight when she came back out. Adrian was at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city laid out beneath him like a circuit board, lights in the rain. He had his jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearms, which was his version of undone, which she remembered more clearly than she wanted to. He heard her and turned. They're both asleep, she said. He nodded. She stood in the middle of the room and thought about the $47 in her wallet and the cold apartment 11 minutes away, and the way Emma had said, my head is hot to a stranger with the uncomplicated trust of a child who didn't know yet who he was or what he could do to their lives. You have to understand something, she said. If you are going to be in their lives, and I am not saying yes, I am saying if, it cannot be like this. You cannot clear pharmacies. You cannot make people disappear from rooms. You cannot solve every problem by deploying whatever army you have access to, and you cannot teach my children that the world rearranges itself for the right kind of power. She held his gaze. They are going to know that I kept them fed and warm and safe on $47 in bad weather and nothing else, and that is going to mean something to them. You don't get to overwrite that. I wouldn't try to. You would. You wouldn't mean to. But you would. She shook her head slightly. You're not built for small. You've never had to be. People change. Some people, she said. Sometimes. He moved toward her, slowly, not all the way, stopped at a respectful distance that she recognized as intentional. This was the new thing in him, or the thing he was showing her. The restraint, the measured approach, the patience that in anyone else she'd take at face value. Stay, he said. Not forever. Not under any terms you don't set. But stay here until you've figured out what you want the next step to look like. Emma needs another day of rest. Lucas is fine, but he's been in contact with her all week. He paused. And you need sleep that isn't listening for emergencies sleep. She hated that he was right. She hated it so completely and specifically that it came back around to something almost funny. If I stay tonight, she said slowly, and tomorrow night, and I decide the step after that, whatever that step is, it happens on my terms, not negotiated, mine. Agreed. And you don't contact them directly, not without me present. Agreed. And when I say done, we're done for the day. No follow-up questions, no door left cracked, no... She stopped, because she was listing terms on a deal she hadn't decided to make, and she could hear herself doing it, and she knew what that meant. She was already making it. The realization settled into her like cold water. Not panic, something quieter and more permanent than panic. She had walked into this building in control of a very simple exchange. Doctor, one night, leave. And somewhere between the pharmacy and the guest room, she had already started negotiating the shape of something larger, and she hadn't noticed when it happened, and that was the most Adrian Blackwell thing that had ever happened to her. She opened her mouth to say something that would reset the conversation, pull it back to the clean edges of what she'd agreed to on the street. Her phone rang. She looked at it. Unknown number, but the area code she recognized. Bridgewater, the town 3 states over where she'd worked for 5 months before moving to Caldwell. She frowned. Answered. Is this Elena Hart? A woman's voice, official, clipped. Who's asking? This is Detective Marlowe, Bridgewater PD. Ms. Hart, we've been trying to reach you. We have some concern. A pause. Careful, deliberate. We have reason to believe you may be a person of interest in connection with an ongoing investigation. I need you to come into the Caldwell precinct for a voluntary interview. The room went very still. An investigation into what? Elena said, and her voice came out steady, which was a small miracle. I'm not able to go into specifics on the phone, but Ms. Hart... Another pause, longer. You should know that the investigation also involves Blackwell Security Corp, and the people we're looking at have been monitoring several individuals connected to that organization, including individuals they consider loose ends. Elena's eyes went to Adrian across the room. He was watching her face with the flat, focused attention of a man who reads rooms for a living. How did you get this number? She said into the phone. Miss Hart, these people already know you're in Caldwell. They've known for approximately... The detective's voice dropped. 72 hours. The call ended. Elena stood in the middle of Adrian Blackwell's penthouse with her dead phone in her hand and the city glittering 40 stories below and the sound of her children breathing down the hall, and she understood, with the absolute terrible clarity of someone whose exit just got blocked from the outside, that one night had never been an option. It had never been the choice. Someone had made the choice for her 72 hours ago, before the rain, before the pharmacy, before any of this. And now the only question left was what she was going to do with the walls closing in, and whether the man standing 12 feet away, the man she'd spent 3 years running from, was the threat inside them, or the only person who understood how high the stakes had just become. She looked at Adrian. He was already reaching for his phone. Adrian didn't ask what the call was about. He didn't have to. He'd been reading rooms and faces for 20 years, and Elena's face right now was a room with every alarm going off simultaneously. He was already on his phone before she lowered hers, moving toward the window with the short, controlled stride of a man shifting into a mode that had nothing to do with penthouse living and tea kettles and careful negotiations about parental access. Rourke, he said into the phone. Flat. Immediate. I need a trace on a call made to this number in the last 4 minutes. Bridgewater area code. Someone using the name Detective Marlowe. He listened for 2 seconds. Yes, now. And pull everything flagged in the last 72 hours on any surveillance connected to Caldwell vicinity. He hung up. He turned to Elena. Talk to me, he said. She set her phone on the counter with a precision that was the physical equivalent of holding herself very still. Someone called claiming to be a detective. Said, I'm a person of interest in an investigation connected to your company. She met his eyes. Said people have known I was in Caldwell for 72 hours, that they consider me a loose end. Adrian's expression didn't change. That was the thing. It didn't change, and she'd learned long ago that the absence of change in his face was more informative than most people's full range of reaction. It meant he was processing something he already had half the shape of. You knew, she said. Not a question. I knew there was a threat vector active against the company. I didn't know your name was attached to it. How long? 3 weeks. The word landed like something dropped from height. 3 weeks. He'd known for 3 weeks that something was moving, something dangerous, something connected to the company whose blast radius she'd spent 3 years trying to get outside of, and he hadn't. She stopped that thought because finishing it led somewhere she couldn't afford to go right now. What is it? She said. What's the threat? He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth is load-bearing and how much is optional. Don't do that, she said sharply. Don't calculate what to tell me. My children are 40 feet down that hall. You tell me everything right now or I take them out of this building tonight, 72 hours or not. He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down on the edge of the couch, not the controlled positioning she was used to, something heavier than that, and put his hands on his knees. 3 years ago, before you left, I was in the middle of a contract negotiation with a private consortium out of Eastern Europe. Security infrastructure, surveillance systems, regional deployment. It was the largest contract the company had ever pursued. He paused. I walked away from it. Why? Because of what they wanted the infrastructure used for. He said it without embellishment, which was somehow worse than if he'd dressed it up. Targeted suppression, political dissidents, journalists. The kind of work that pays extraordinarily well and ends careers and occasionally ends people. Elena was very still. I walked away, he continued, but I'd been far enough into the negotiation that I had information, names, structures, financial routes, the kind of information that a consortium like that doesn't want loose in the world. So they've been waiting, she said slowly. 3 years. Waiting for leverage. He looked at her directly. They're not coming after the company. The company has too many layers, too many legal protections, too much visibility. They're coming after something personal, something I'd moved to protect. The silence stretched. They found me, Elena said. They found me, and they waited to see if you'd... She stopped. The geometry of it was assembling itself in her mind with horrible clarity, piece by piece. The rain, tonight. You said your convoy was in that neighborhood for a site meeting. Yes. Was it? The pause was a fraction too long. Adrian? No, he said. My security team picked up your location 48 hours ago from secondary surveillance. I was in that neighborhood because I was trying to decide whether to... He stopped, pressed his mouth together. Whether to approach you, or to set up a protective perimeter without you knowing and manage the threat without bringing you into it. The room tilted slightly. Or maybe that was just Elena's understanding of the last 6 hours reorganizing itself into a new and significantly worse shape. You were already there, she said, when I came out of the building, with the stroller, in the rain. Yes. That wasn't coincidence. No. She stood up. She needed to be standing. She needed the physical sensation of her feet on the floor because the alternative was the feeling of ground disappearing. You let me think it was random. You let me stand there in the rain, thinking I'd just run into you by chance and you... Her voice was tightly controlled, and the control was costing her visibly. You were already there. You already knew where I was. You knew about the children. I knew you had children. I didn't know... He stopped. I suspected they were mine when I saw them. I didn't know before that moment. But you came there knowing I had children. She turned away from him, one hand going to the back of her neck, the same gesture she'd watched him make an hour ago without registering what it meant. 2 people with the same reflex for the same kind of overwhelm. How long have you had my location? 48 hours. And in those 48 hours you didn't think about calling, warning me, giving me any kind of agency in what happened next. You just positioned yourself. I was trying to protect you without what? Without asking? Without treating me like someone who gets to decide what protection looks like? She turned back, and the look on her face was the kind that doesn't come from anger alone, that comes from the specific pain of a wound reopening along exactly the same seam it tore the first time. This is what I left. This. Right here. You making decisions about my life because you're certain you know best. You haven't changed anything. You've just gotten more patient about it. Adrian absorbed that without moving. She could see the impact of it land, and she could see him resist the reflex to defend himself, and she wasn't sure which version of that she found more unsettling. His phone vibrated on the cushion beside him. He looked at it. Whatever he saw made the line of his jaw sharpen. What? She said. He turned the phone to face her. It was a photograph, taken from distance, through glass, with the particular grain of a long lens used in low light. It showed the interior of a restaurant, a booth, 2 people, a conversation that looked intense. One of the people was a man she didn't recognize, heavy-set, unremarkable, the kind of face designed to be forgotten. The other person was someone she knew. Her stomach dropped straight through the floor. It was Carla Voss, who had been Elena's closest friend in Caldwell for 18 months. Carla, who had helped her find the apartment, who had watched the twins on 3 separate occasions when Elena's shifts ran over, who had sat with her at the kitchen table over cheap wine and never asked questions Elena didn't want to answer. Carla, who was the only person in Caldwell who knew Elena's real last name. "When was this taken?" Elena said. Her voice had gone somewhere very flat and very far away. 61 hours ago. 61 hours. 11 hours before the call from the fake detective. 13 hours before Adrian's convoy appeared on Caldwell Street. The sequencing assembled itself with merciless clarity. "She told them where I was," Elena said. "The man she's meeting with is a mid-level contractor connected to the consortium. His name is Brennan. He's been in Caldwell for at least a week." Adrian's voice was careful now, measured, the tone of someone delivering something fragile. "The call you received tonight wasn't from police. It was designed to accomplish two things: confirm you're still in the city and test whether you'd run. If you ran alone, they could take you outside of any protective framework. If you ran to me, they'd have both of us in one place." She felt the walls complete themselves around her, the geometry of the trap rendered fully visible now that it was too late to matter. A loose end and a target. Together. Yes. She looked at the photograph. At Carla's face, turned slightly toward the man across the table, an expression Elena couldn't fully read at this resolution, but could feel in the particular way bad news always has a texture before it has a shape. "Why?" Elena said. "Why would Carla—" "We don't know yet. Money is the most likely answer. It usually is." He paused. "Or fear. They're very good at manufacturing fear in people who have something to lose." Elena thought about Carla's daughter, 8 years old, a custody situation that was perpetually precarious. The thing Carla never talked about directly, but that shaped everything around it, the way a crack in a foundation shapes a whole house. She thought, they found her weakness, and they used it, the same way they find everyone's weakness and use it, the same way I have a weakness sitting 40 feet down that hall in 2 small beds. She put the phone down. "How bad is this?" she said, bluntly, clinically. "Don't manage me. How bad?" Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him make the decision to give her the real answer. "Bad enough that I can't guarantee safety for you in Caldwell. Not in your apartment, not at your job, not in any space where my security presence would be visible. Because visible protection makes you a confirmed target." He laced his hands together. "The consortium's play is to use you to get to me. Not physically, reputationally, legally. They want evidence, manufactured or real, of something that would undo the company's government contracts. If they can put you in proximity to anything they've engineered, they can build a case." He paused. "They've had 61 hours with whatever Carla gave them. We don't know what she gave them." "My address," Elena said. "My work schedule. The twins' names." She stopped on that, felt the edges of it. She knew their names. The silence in the room had a different quality now, the pressurized kind. Adrian's phone went again. He answered, listened for 30 seconds without speaking, and hung up. "What?" Elena said. "Your apartment building. Someone accessed the building registry an hour ago using forged management credentials." He stood up. "They have your unit number." Elena was moving before he finished the sentence. Down the hall, through the guest room door, to the beds. Emma sleeping. Lucas sleeping. Both breathing, both warm, both completely unaware of the specific shape of the danger that had been building around them for 61 hours, while their mother poured coffee and worked doubles and trusted the wrong person. She stood at the foot of the beds and she breathed, and she did not allow herself the luxury of falling apart, because falling apart was the thing you did when the crisis was over, and the crisis was categorically not over. She heard Adrian in the doorway behind her. "I need to make a call," she said, not turning around. To Carla. "Elena, I need to hear it from her." She turned then. "I need to ask her myself before I accept that someone I trusted—" She stopped, steadied. "I need to make the call." He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded and stepped back. She called. Carla picked up on the second ring, which was somehow worse than if she hadn't answered. Her voice was normal, slightly tired, the way she always sounded after 9 p.m. "Hey, you okay? It's late." "I'm fine." Elena kept her eyes on the window, on the rain that was finally starting to ease. "Hey, did anything strange happen today? Around the building? Or—" Anyone asking about me? A pause. Half a second. The kind of pause that most people wouldn't clock. Elena clocked it. No, Carla said. Nothing weird. Why? What's going on? Nothing. Just a weird feeling. Hey, I meant to ask, did you mention to anyone that I was back on the Thursday shift this week? I thought someone called the diner looking for me. No, I don't think so. Another pause. Marginally longer. Maybe Rachel. She knew your schedule. Rachel had been out of town since Monday. Elena knew this because Rachel had texted her from the airport. She closed her eyes, opened them. Right, she said. Probably Rachel. Thanks. Get some sleep. She hung up. She stood there with her hand around the phone until she felt the warmth of it against her palm, because she needed something real to hold on to, and that was what was available. Carla had lied. Cleanly, quickly, with the ease of someone who had prepared for the question. Not the frightened improvisation of someone caught off guard. Prepared. Which meant she'd known Elena might call. Which meant whoever was directing this had coached her. Which meant it was worse than opportunistic. Someone had been building this patiently, carefully, with full knowledge of Elena's habits and relationships and the specific texture of her life in Caldwell. She walked back to the main room. Adrian read her face. She lied, Elena said. He nodded. How long have they been watching me? Not a question this time. A number she needed. Based on Brennan's entry into Caldwell, at least a week, possibly longer through Carla. He paused. Possibly from the beginning. From the beginning? She repeated it slowly. What beginning? When you arrived in Caldwell. 18 months ago. The floor did the tilting thing again. You're saying someone has been watching me for 18 months. I'm saying it's possible. Carla has been in my life for 18 months. Elena's voice had gone somewhere past anger, into a register that was quieter and more dangerous than anger. She was there when I brought the twins home from the clinic after Lucas's checkup. She was there on Emma's first birthday. She knew what formula I used, what their sleep schedule was, which one of them was scared of the dark. She stopped. The image that came with that specific detail was too precise and too terrible to look at directly. Someone has been inside my life for 18 months. Inside my children's lives. Yes. The single syllable fell into the room like something permanent. She turned away. Not from him specifically, from everything. From the room, from the city outside the glass. From the whole architecture of the life she'd constructed with such painful deliberateness in Caldwell. The stability she'd built from nothing. Intended with both hands and believed in, genuinely believed in, because she'd had to believe in something. It had been a watched terrarium. That was what she understood now. She'd been living inside a controlled environment while someone outside the glass cataloged her movements and her relationships and the details of her children's lives, waiting for the moment the information became useful. She had worked so hard to disappear. She had never been invisible. The grief of that was enormous, and she stood inside it for exactly as long as she could afford to, which was about 45 seconds, and then she set it aside in the place where she put things she didn't have time for yet, and she turned around. What do we do? She said. Adrian looked at her. Something shifted in his face at the we. Not satisfaction, something more complicated and less comfortable than satisfaction. The estate, he said, outside the city. It's defensible, controlled perimeter, no registered connection to your name. I move you and the children there tonight, and I put my full security apparatus around you while we identify and neutralize the threat. Neutralize, she said. What does that mean? Legally. Evidence to the right federal contacts, financial pressure on the consortium's legitimate business interests. We remove their leverage. He paused. It takes time. How much time? Weeks. Possibly months. She almost laughed. She almost did. Weeks to months in Adrian Blackwell's estate. The two of them and 2 toddlers and 3 years of unfinished wreckage between them, sealed inside his world exactly the way she'd spent 3 years ensuring she never would be again. There's no other option, she said. Not one that keeps them safe. She looked toward the hallway, toward the sound of small breathing. She thought about Emma saying, "My head is hot," with complete trust, as if the world were a place that could be relied upon to fix things when you named them honestly. She thought about Lucas stacking soap towers with the patient certainty of someone who believed in the structural integrity of things. She thought about what it meant to be wrong about safety, to build it out of the wrong materials, to trust the wrong architecture. She thought about what she owed them, which was everything, which had always been everything, which would continue to be everything, regardless of what it cost her. "Pack whatever the children need for an extended stay," Adrian said. He was on his phone again, moving, the machine of him engaging with a totality she'd forgotten was possible. "We leave in 20 minutes. I'll have a team at your apartment within the hour to retrieve essential items. I'm not giving your team access to my apartment." He looked at her. "I'll make a list," she said. "They follow it exactly. Nothing else." A beat. "Fine. And I need a phone, clean one, not traceable to either of us." He produced one from a drawer in the kitchen island without comment, which told her he'd had it ready, which told her he'd been anticipating this moment longer than tonight. She took it. She stood in the kitchen of a penthouse she'd told herself she would never enter and held a clean phone she'd told herself she would never need, and thought about the 27 versions of the future she'd planned in Caldwell, the incremental independence, the savings account with $412 in it, the promotion at the diner that would have meant health insurance, the preschool she'd researched for September. All of it. All of it was behind a door that had just locked from the outside. She looked at Adrian, who was already running 3 conversations simultaneously through 2 devices with the focused efficiency of a man in his element, a man who was at his most fully realized when the situation was dangerous and the parameters were clear. And she realized, with a cold and clarifying certainty, that she was about to spend an indeterminate number of weeks inside the world of the man she'd escaped, dependent on his resources, surrounded by his infrastructure, sleeping under his roof, not because she'd run out of options, but because someone had spent 18 months ensuring she would run out of options at precisely this moment, and the trap had closed so perfectly that she hadn't felt it until her hands were already inside it. She opened her mouth. Adrian's lead security officer appeared in the elevator. She hadn't heard it open, hadn't heard anything, and that told her the man had been in the building the whole time, waiting on a floor below, which meant Adrian had deployed protection around her before tonight, before the convoy, before the pharmacy. And the officer handed him a tablet and said 3 words very quietly. Adrian looked at the tablet. The color didn't drain from his face. He wasn't built for that kind of visible response. But something behind his eyes went completely still in a way she'd never seen before. The kind of still that precedes the worst kind of movement. "What is it?" Elena said. He turned the tablet to face her. On the screen was a live security feed, grainy and green-tinted, the timestamp running in the corner. It showed the street outside her apartment building in Caldwell. It showed 2 men in dark clothing approaching the entrance with the specific unhurried confidence of people who already know the door code. The timestamp read 41 minutes ago. They had been at her apartment while she was sitting in the pharmacy arguing about $47. While she was in the car. While she was watching Dr. Reeves check Emma's temperature and thinking about how the clinic had taken 4 hours and cost her the copay. They had been in her home. Elena stared at the screen and felt something restructure itself inside her. Not break, not collapse, something colder and more fundamental than that. The part of her that had spent 3 years being a mother and a survivor, and a person who managed, who always managed, who found the solution in the $47 and the bad weather and the sheer refusal to stop. That part went quiet. And something older and harder and considerably less patient took its place. She handed the tablet back. She looked at Adrian with an expression that he held under for a long moment. Something he recognized and had never seen directed at him before, not from her. The look of someone who has just decided that the rules they were playing by no longer apply. 20 minutes is too long, she said. Adrian held her gaze. Then he nodded once and said into the phone, "We move now." They moved in 8 minutes. Not 20. 8. Adrian's team materialized with the silent efficiency of people who had rehearsed extraction scenarios enough times that urgency had become indistinguishable from routine. Elena didn't ask how many of them there were. She counted 4 in the penthouse, 2 in the elevator, at least 3 more she sensed rather than saw. Presences at the edges of the operation, managing variables she couldn't see from her position. She was already in the guest room when Adrian appeared in the doorway. "Elena, I'm getting them." She was lifting Lucas, who had half woken with the particular boneless confusion of a toddler pulled from deep sleep. He made a sound against her neck, Not quite a word. She pressed her hand to the back of his head and held him, and simultaneously reached for Emma with her other arm, and Emma came awake faster, eyes open and too bright with the residual fever, taking in the room and the strangeness of it without crying, because Emma didn't cry when things were wrong. Emma went very still and watched, which was her mother's reflex in miniature, and it broke Elena's heart every time she saw it. "Car," Elena told her. "We're going for a ride." "Night," Emma said. "Night ride." "Yeah." She got them both settled against her, one on each hip, the physical weight of them so familiar it had become a kind of ballast, the thing that kept her from tilting entirely off axis. "You're okay, both of you." She looked at Adrian. "Diaper bag. Counter in the bathroom." He had it in 15 seconds. He held it out to her. Their hands didn't touch in the exchange, and she noted the deliberateness of that. Him making space, not closing it, and filed it somewhere she didn't have time to examine. The elevator, the lobby, which had been cleared, the underground garage, which smelled like exhaust and concrete, and the specific tension of a situation where everyone around you is armed and moving with purpose. A different vehicle than the one from earlier, larger, higher clearance, the windows dark to the point of opacity. Elena strapped the twins into the car seats that were already installed in the back, which told her these vehicles were configured for family transport, which told her Adrian had been preparing for a specific future long before tonight confirmed it was necessary, and she decided not to think about what that meant until she had the bandwidth to think about anything at all. She got in beside the children. Adrian got in front. His security lead, a compact woman in her 40s named Solus, whose eyes moved with the constant peripheral sweep of someone who has been responsible for keeping people alive in bad situations, took the wheel without a word. They were moving before Elena's door fully closed. She didn't ask where the estate was. She watched the city unreal behind the dark glass. Streetlights, closed restaurants, the occasional figure hunched against the rain that was finally thinning to something manageable, and she held Emma's hand and Lucas fell back asleep against her arm with the untroubled faith of a child who believes that wherever his mother is where he should be. She hated how much she needed that right now. 40 minutes out of the city, past the point where the commercial sprawl gave way to the particular darkness of money. No streetlights, no fast food signs, just tree lines and long driveways and the sense of the world pulling back from itself. The vehicle slowed and turned through a gate that opened before they reached it. The estate materialized from the darkness by degrees. She'd expected imposing. What she got was something more unsettling than imposing. It looked like a house where someone might actually live. Stone and timber, not glass and steel, set back from the drive behind a lawn that was too large to register as a lawn, more like a contained landscape, and lit from within with the warm, amber quality of rooms that had furniture chosen for use rather than display. She hated that she liked it. She hated that it felt, despite every cell in her body protesting the word, like something approaching shelter. Solus parked. 2 more vehicles pulled in flanking positions. Elena got the twins out herself, declined the assistance of the security team member who moved to help, and carried them both up the front steps because they were half asleep and she needed the physical contact the same way she needed the ballast. Inside. Wide entrance hall, stone floor, the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness but deliberate insulation from outside noise. Solus disappeared immediately with 2 of the team. Other personnel moved through rooms Elena couldn't see, establishing perimeters, doing whatever they did in the language of security that she didn't speak but was learning to read through body language alone. Adrian led her up a staircase without being asked, which meant he'd thought about where to put them before tonight. The room was at the end of a hallway. 2 connected rooms, actually. A bedroom and an adjoining smaller space that someone had fitted with 2 low beds and soft lighting and a basket of children's things that still had the tags on them. She stood in the doorway of the smaller room and looked at the tags and understood that he'd had someone prepare this space in advance, possibly recently, possibly the moment his security team confirmed her location 48 hours ago. She settled Emma first. The girl was fading fast, the fever doing what fevers did in the small hours, backing down to something manageable. She was asleep before Elena finished pulling the blanket up. Lucas arranged himself with the self-sufficient precision she'd come to depend on, turned on his side, put his thumb near his mouth without quite putting it in, and was gone. She stood between the 2 small beds for a moment. Then she went back to the hallway. Adrian was waiting, not hovering, actually waiting, positioned near the staircase with a studied distance that she recognized as deliberate. "The apartment," she said. "What did they take?" "We're still assessing. The team got in approximately 19 minutes after the men on the feed. The unit had been searched, selectively." He paused. "They weren't looking for valuables." "What were they looking for? Documents? Digital devices? Anything with your history, your contacts?" He held her gaze. "They took a laptop. The laptop." She thought about what was on it. Work files, medical records for the twins. The folder she'd never named but knew the contents of. A documented record of the things she'd observed in Adrian's world before she left. The names and dates and transactions she'd recorded as insurance, as the kind of quiet self-protection that a woman without options builds for herself when she understands the scale of what she's adjacent to. She had never used it, had never intended to use it. It was just the thing you do when you don't trust the ground beneath you. "There's a folder," she said carefully. "Password protected. On the hard drive." Adrian's expression shifted by about 2 millimeters, which was the equivalent of a full facial collapse in any other human being. "What's in it?" he said. "Things I documented. From before. Names, dates, meeting records." She watched him process that. "I kept records, Adrian. I wasn't naive about the world you were operating in, and I kept records because I had no other... I understand why you did it." He said it quickly, cutting off the defense before it could build. "I'm not..." He stopped, breathed. "If they have that folder and they can crack the encryption, they have enough to build a narrative. Not a true one, but a legal one. The kind that survives a news cycle. Which is what they want. Which is what they want." He turned away briefly, and she watched the set of his shoulders absorb the specific weight of a man recalculating an already bad situation. "We have to move faster than I planned." He was on the phone again, walking toward the study at the end of the hall. Elena followed. Wasn't invited, and she didn't wait to be. The study was lived in a way the penthouse wasn't. Books with cracked spines, a desk with actual paper on it. The kind of room where someone comes to think rather than to perform thinking. She stood near the door while he worked the phone, listening to the architecture of the crisis being assembled around her, the rapid exchange of names and locations and tactical assessments that were in English but in a dialect she was only partially fluent in. Then Solis appeared in the doorway. She said 3 words to Adrian. Elena was watching his back, and she saw it go rigid in the specific way that meant the situation had just ratcheted past the level he'd been managing. He turned around. "Brennan is here," he said. Elena's breath stopped for half a second. "Here where?" "The property perimeter, eastern fence line. He's not alone." The next 4 minutes happened with a compression of time that Elena would later have difficulty sequencing. Adrian and Solis moved into a rapid tactical exchange. Doors opened and closed. Equipment appeared from places that suggested the estate's infrastructure ran considerably deeper than its visible architecture. Adrian pressed something into Elena's hand, small, solid. And when she looked down, it was a radio handset, a simple one, single frequency. "You stay on that frequency," he said. "Solis stays with you. You do not open doors, you do not go to windows, and you do not come looking for me regardless of what you hear. You're going out there. I'm going to the security center, 30 meters from the main house." He held her gaze. "I need eyes on the whole perimeter. Sending you out to a security center during a perimeter breach is not..." "Elena." Short, absolute. "Trust me for 10 minutes. She looked at him. 10 minutes. 3 years of careful architecture coming down to 10 minutes, and a radio handset and the sound of her children breathing through a wall. She looked at the radio. She looked at him. 10 minutes, she said. He was gone. Solis positioned herself near the bedroom hallway, not the window, not the door, midpoint, maximum sightlines in both directions, the stance of someone who has done this specific job in worse places than a stone estate in the rain. Elena stood in the study. She heard from somewhere outside and below the sound of voices on radio channels. Solis had an earpiece, and the voices were too compressed to parse. She heard the perimeter team moving, the low crunch of footsteps on wet ground transmitted through the building's bones. She heard her own breathing, which was too loud and too fast, and she regulated it by force of will because the alternative was panic, and panic was a luxury she categorically could not afford. 4 minutes passed. On the 5th minute, the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout. Complete, instantaneous darkness, every circuit gone simultaneously, the kind of outage that doesn't happen by accident. Elena's hand found the desk edge before the darkness fully registered. She heard Solis move, immediate, no hesitation, the beam of a tactical light cutting the study into geometry. "Generator will kick," Solis said. Her voice was remarkable in its flatness. Just a fact, just information. 7 seconds of absolute darkness. Then the generator came up, emergency lighting only, the amber low-level system that turned the estate into a series of lit corridors surrounded by shadow. Elena's radio crackled. Adrian's voice. "We're okay. Deliberate outage, their move. We expected it." A pause, barely 2 seconds, but dense with the sound of controlled urgency. "Elena, I need you to listen carefully. Brennan brought 4 people. 2 are confirmed at the east fence. 2 are unaccounted for." Unaccounted for. She parsed that. "They're inside," she said. "Possibly inside the outer grounds, not the house." Another pause. "Solis." Solis answered without looking at Elena. "Copy. Move them to the secondary room. Now." Solis was already moving, hand on Elena's arm. Not rough, directional. The physical language of someone whose job has no room for negotiation. Elena went without argument because argument required a split-second assessment of the tactical picture, and hers was significantly less complete than Solis's. Through the hallway, to the children's room. Elena got the twins before Solis reached them. She wasn't going to stand back from this. From them. Not for any operational preference. Lucas woke with a sharp inhale, immediately silent when she pressed her mouth to his ear and said, "It's me. It's Mama. Quiet." Emma didn't fully wake. Elena lifted her and Lucas pressed himself to Elena's side, and the 3 of them moved with Solis down a hall Elena hadn't seen, toward the back of the house, down a half staircase to a room that resolved in the emergency lighting as something built with a different purpose than the rest of the estate. Lower ceiling, reinforced door, a room where the walls were thicker than they needed to be for any architectural reason. A safe room. Solis got the door. Elena went through with the children. Solis came in behind her, and the door sealed with the hydraulic finality of something engineered for permanence. The room was small and lit by battery-powered panel lighting and contained 2 chairs, a cot, a first aid kit mounted to the wall, and a secondary radio system. Lucas sat on the cot and looked at the walls with his serious eyes and didn't make a sound. Emma stirred against Elena's shoulder, murmured something, slipped back. Elena held her daughter and looked at the reinforced door and thought about the fact that she was sitting inside a vault while men she'd never met circled a house she'd been in for less than an hour, and the man she'd spent 3 years running from was somewhere outside in the dark, managing a crisis that existed, in some foundational way, because of the life he'd chosen before she chose to leave it. Her radio crackled again. 2 confirmed in custody, Eastern Sector. Adrian's voice, tight but controlled. "Brennan is one of them." She exhaled. "The other 2. She pushed the transmit button. "Where?" A pause that was 2 seconds too long. "Still working on that." Solis's hand moved to the weapon at her side. Not drawing, just registering. A professional reflex that told Elena everything the words hadn't. Lucas looked at Solis's hand. Then he looked at his mother. Elena met his eyes and held them, and kept her face in the register of, "We are okay." Because that was the job right now. That was the only job, and she did it the way she'd been doing it for 2 years, by deciding it was true and communicating the decision with every muscle in her face. Lucas looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his small pajama pants. She hadn't known he had anything in there, hadn't thought to check, and produced the smallest of the decorative soaps from the penthouse bathroom. He'd pocketed it. Of course he had. He held it out to her. "For your hands," he said, gravely. She took it. She pressed it in her palm, and the absurdity and the love of it hit her somewhere in the middle of her chest with the force of something structural, and she held it together with everything she had. The radio was silent for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Elena counted. Then, a sound from above. not loud. A single impact somewhere on the upper floor, the kind of sound that a house makes when weight is applied to it from outside. Solis was on her radio immediately, voice dropping to something subvocal that Elena couldn't parse. She positioned herself between the door and the cot where Lucas sat. Elena set Emma down on the cot beside her brother, stood up, and turned to face the door. She had nothing in her hands. No weapon, no tactical training, nothing but the specific and absolute ferocity of a person who has just understood that the two things behind her are the only things in the world that matter, and whatever comes through that door is going to encounter that fact at full force. Solis looked at her. "Stay behind me," Solis said. "I'll stay beside you," Elena said. A beat. Solis looked at her face, made a rapid assessment, nodded once. The sound above them moved. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, which was worse than rushed because it meant someone who wasn't worried about being heard. Someone operating under the assumption that the response time was on their side. Then the radio exploded with noise, multiple voices overlapping, Adrian's cutting through. "Southside, third floor breach, Unit 2, intercept." And then a sound that wasn't a voice, something percussive and final. And then Adrian again, breathing harder now, still controlled but the control costing something. "I need a status on the safe room. I need it now." Solis pressed transmit. "Secure. Both. Copy." A pause. 3 seconds. The longest 3 seconds Elena had experienced in a night that had been constructed entirely of long seconds. "The breach is being handled. Hold position." Elena looked at the ceiling. The footsteps above had stopped. She didn't know what that meant. She held the tiny soap in her closed fist and stood beside a woman she'd met 40 minutes ago and looked at the door and breathed, and did not allow herself to imagine any version of the next 60 seconds, except the one where everyone she needed to be okay was okay. The radio crackled once more. It wasn't Adrian's voice this time. It was someone else from the security team, a voice she didn't recognize, clipped and professional. "Third floor clear, 2 in custody. Blackwell is..." Static. Then nothing. Solis turned to look at her. Elena looked at the radio. The silence coming out of it had a different texture than the operational silences before. Not the compression of a live situation being managed. Something else. Something with an edge to it that she recognized from the worst moments of the last 3 years. The silence that precedes information you can't unreceive. "Solis," she said. Her voice was absolutely steady. "Where is he?" Solis pressed her earpiece, listened. Her face did nothing, which was the most trained nothing Elena had ever seen on a human face, the kind of nothing that takes years to build over whatever is actually happening underneath. "Solis." Harder now. The security officer turned to face her fully, and Elena understood, in the half-second before Solis spoke, with the bone-deep certainty of someone whose body has always known things before her mind catches up, that the night was not over, that the worst part of it was not the men at the fence or the footsteps on the floor above or the darkness or the forged documents or the 18 months of surveillance or any of the things she'd already survived in the last few hours. The worst part was whatever had just happened to the man outside this room, the man who had spent 3 years becoming the shape of an absence in her life, the man whose face her children wore, the man who had stood in a pharmacy and looked at his son for the first time and said, "We're going to fix that." And whatever had happened to him in the last 60 seconds of radio silence was now standing between her and every version of the future she had left to choose from. She grabbed the door handle. Solis moved to block her. "You cannot. Tell me he's alive." Elena looked at her with eyes that had gone past fear into something that didn't have a civilian name. "Tell me right now." Solis held her gaze. 1 second, 2. "He's alive," Solis said. "He took a hit. Our medic is with him." The door handle was cold under Elena's palm. "How bad?" she said. Solis's jaw moved slightly. The microscopic tell of someone choosing accuracy over comfort. "Bad enough," she said, "that you need to stay in this room until I get confirmation." Elena stood at the door of the vault with her children behind her and the radio dead in her hand and the cold metal handle under her palm, and she made the hardest calculation she'd made in a night, built entirely of impossible calculations. Whether the woman in front of her was telling the truth, whether alive meant what it usually meant, or the gentler version of it that people used when they needed you to stay manageable for another few minutes. Whether the man who had spent this entire night placing himself between her children and a threat he'd known about longer than he'd told her was going to be standing on the other side of that door when it finally opened. Lucas touched the back of her knee with one small hand. She looked down at him. He was standing behind her, serious-eyed, the half-eaten soap tower builder, the quiet one, the one who watched everything and said little, and he was looking up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not fear, not confusion, something older than both, something that looked remarkably like the expression of a person who understands that the moment they are in is important and has decided to be present for it regardless. Adrian's eyes, Adrian's face, her son. She turned back to the door. She turned the handle. The door opened into a hallway that smelled like rain and copper. Elena knew that smell. She'd grown up with a father who worked construction, who came home with split knuckles and the particular metallic edge of blood mixed with outdoor air. It was a smell that meant something had been paid for. She knew it before she saw anything, before her eyes adjusted to the emergency lighting that turned everything amber and shadow, before Solis moved ahead of her with one arm back in the instinctive geometry of someone trying to manage two priorities simultaneously. She saw the medic first, crouched at the end of the hallway, bag open, the practiced economy of movement that meant he was working rather than waiting. Then she saw the security team member holding a flashlight steady with both hands, the beam directed downward. Then she saw Adrian. He was sitting with his back against the wall, not lying down, which she registered as significant. A man who was unconscious, or worse, didn't choose a wall to sit against. His left hand was pressed to his side below the ribs, and the medic's hands were there too, working with gauze and pressure and the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this in worse places with worse lighting. His right hand was on his knee. His head was up. He was looking at her. She crossed the distance between them without making a decision to do it. Her knees hit the floor beside him, and she looked at the medic's hands and looked at Adrian's face and made the assessment the way she'd learned to make every assessment. Fast, complete, without the luxury of denial. Through and through, the medic said, without looking up, addressing her because she was clearly the person who needed the information. Caught the lateral edge. No organ involvement. He's going to need a surgical team for proper closure, but he's stable. Hospital, she said. We have a surgical facility on the estate grounds, Adrian said. His voice was compressed, the specific compression of someone managing pain through the architecture of their own controlled breathing. 30 meters east of the security center. She looked at him. Of course you do. Something moved in his eyes that might, in a different moment, have been humor. The others, she said to the medic. The two from the third floor. Detained, both. He was taping now, efficient hands moving in the flashlight beam. Mr. Blackwell's team handled it. She sat back on her heels. The adrenaline was still running through her at full volume, but her hands had gone steady in the way they always went steady when the situation required it. The paradox of crisis she'd discovered in the first months of single motherhood. The worse the emergency, the calmer her hands. She looked at Adrian. You said 10 minutes, she said. I was optimistic. You were shot. That's why I was optimistic. He shifted slightly, winced in a way that was very controlled and still visible, and she watched him register the visibility of it with the faint irritation of a man unaccustomed to being readable. The children. In the room, with Solis. He exhaled. Just that. One long exhale that released something he'd been holding since the moment she'd told him Emma had a fever in the rain on Caldwell Street, maybe longer, maybe since the convoy appeared at the intersection, maybe since the moment his security team showed him a woman with a stroller and he understood what he was looking at. Okay, he said, quietly. Okay. The medic finished the field dressing. Two members of the security team appeared with a stretcher that Adrian looked at and categorically refused, which the medic accepted with the resignation of someone who had expected exactly this response. And they got him to his feet instead, Elena on one side, a team member on the other, and they moved down the hallway and out through a side door into the rain-washed air of the estate grounds. The surgical facility was exactly where he'd said it was. Small, clean, built into what looked like a converted outbuilding, the kind of thing that could pass as a groundskeeper's annex to anyone who wasn't looking for a reason to look more carefully. Inside, 2 surgical lights, a proper table, a woman in her 50s who was pulling on gloves when they came through the door with the matter-of-fact readiness of someone on permanent call. "Through and through, lateral," the medic said. "I heard." She looked at Adrian with the specific lack of deference that came from having patched him up before. "Sit down before you decide not to." He sat. Elena stepped back to give the surgeon room. She stood against the wall and watched and breathed, and when one of the security team offered her a cup of something hot, she took it without looking at what it was, and held it in both hands and let the warmth run up through her palms. It took 40 minutes. She stayed for all of it. At some point, Solis appeared in the doorway with Lucas on her hip, which Elena would not have predicted as an image she'd ever see. The stone-faced security officer and the serious-eyed toddler regarding each other with what appeared to be mutual assessment. Lucas had Emma's hand. Emma was awake now, fever warm but present, looking around the facility with the wide-eyed inventory of a 2-year-old cataloging a new environment. Emma looked at her mother. "Mama, stay," she said. A statement, not a question. Emma never asked questions she could assert instead. "Mama's staying," Elena confirmed. Emma looked at the man on the table, at the surgeon's hands, at the lights. She processed this with the unsettling thoroughness of a child who understood more than she had language for. Then she looked back at Elena. "Man hurt," she said. "He's going to be okay." Emma considered this. "Fix him," she said, with the absolute authority of someone issuing a directive that should not require explanation. Elena pressed her mouth together for a moment. "Working on it," she said. They moved Adrian to a recovery room, a real room, with a proper bed, attached to the facility, clearly built for exactly this kind of extended use. And the surgeon gave Elena a list of instructions with the direct efficiency of someone who assumed competence in the recipient, which Elena appreciated more than she could have articulated. She listened, remembered everything, asked 2 questions, received 2 clear answers. Then the surgeon left, and the medic left, and Solis settled the twins in the adjoining sitting room with a collection of items that had appeared from somewhere. Board books, soft toys, a child's cup of water. And the door was mostly closed, and it was quiet. Adrian was awake, pale in the way that blood loss makes people pale. The color borrowed from somewhere it would take time to pay back, but his eyes were clear and tracking and fixed on her when she pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down. She didn't say anything immediately. She'd said so many words in the last few hours. She sat in the chair and looked at him, and let the silence be what it was. Not hostile, not comfortable, something more honest than either. "Brennan will talk," he said eventually. His voice was rough at the edges, the anesthetic cutting his usual precision by about 30%. "He's not a believer, he's contracted. They always talk when the contract fails." "And the consortium. My legal team has been running parallel to this for 2 weeks. Federal contacts were briefed tonight before we left the penthouse." He paused to breathe through something, a wave of discomfort he managed, and continued. "By morning, there will be documentation in the hands of 3 separate agencies on 2 continents. The consortium's leverage disappears when the story becomes public on our terms rather than theirs. Your terms," she said. Not accusatory, just the observation of a woman who had spent the night being reminded of what his terms looked like. "Our terms," he said. And then, before she could respond, "I know the difference isn't obvious right now. I know tonight looked like every reason you had for leaving. The convoy, the cleared pharmacy, the penthouse, the estate, all of it." He stopped, gathered himself against whatever the wound was doing to his concentration. "I know it looked like control." "It was control," she said. "Some of it. The 48 hours, knowing where I was and positioning yourself instead of calling. Yes. That was the old version of you." "Yes." He held her gaze. "It was, and I did it because I was—" He stopped again, and this time it wasn't the wound. It was something harder to manage than pain. "I was afraid that if I called, you'd run again. And this time there would be a reason to run that was real and immediate, and I couldn't—" His jaw tightened. "I couldn't make myself risk it." "So you controlled the variable." "So I controlled the variable." He said it with the full weight of self-awareness. No defense in it, no architecture of justification. Just the statement of a man holding up something he'd done and looking at it clearly. "I was wrong to do it that way. I know that. I knew it when I was doing it." She leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Then why?" "Because knowing something is wrong doesn't always stop you from doing it when you're scared." He looked at her directly. You know that. You know exactly what that is. She did. She knew it from the inside, from the specific texture of the decisions she'd made in the last 3 years that she'd known were costing her something even as she made them. The isolation, the refusal of help, the way she'd weaponized independence until it looked indistinguishable from strength. She looked at her hands. "Carla," she said, "my team spoke with her tonight, after Brennan was secured." He was quiet for a moment. They threatened her daughter, custody documentation falsified, enough to trigger a hearing that would have gone badly for her. He paused. She held out for 6 weeks before she gave them anything. She gave them your work schedule and your building. She didn't give them the children's names. She told them you lived alone. Elena absorbed that. 6 weeks. Carla had carried that for 6 weeks. The weight of it. The impossible choice between two people she couldn't protect simultaneously, and she'd given the least she could give and lied about the rest. "Where is she now?" Elena said. "Safe house. Her daughter too." He watched her face. "What do you want to do about her?" "Nothing," Elena said. After a moment, "I want to call her. Tomorrow. I want to—" She stopped. "I don't know what I want to say to her yet, but she was trying to protect her kid. I understand that better than I understand most things." Adrian nodded. He understood she wasn't absolving anything, just placing it accurately. "The folder," Elena said. "On the laptop, the documentation I kept. Brennan's team will have tried to crack the encryption. They may have succeeded." He held her gaze steadily. "Whatever's in it, Elena, it's not going to be used against me. Not because I'm going to suppress it, because the things you documented were real, but they don't say what they'll try to make them say. We'll have federal representation for both of us by morning." "Both of us," she said. "You're in this now, whether you want to be or not. My legal team works for both of us until it's resolved." He said it flatly, a fact. "After that, you can decide what you want your relationship with my legal team to be, which can be nothing, if that's what you want." She studied him. The pale face, the careful breathing, the eyes that were watching her with the focused attention of a man who had decided that this conversation was worth more than rest. "Why did you walk away from the contract?" she said. 3 years ago, the consortium." He was quiet for a moment. "Because you told me something," he said. "The night before you left. We were arguing. About the Vickers acquisition, actually. Something completely unrelated. And you said—" He stopped. The pause had a different quality than the ones before. Not tactical, genuinely searching. "You said that you used to be able to tell the difference between the things I was willing to do and the things I wasn't. And that you couldn't anymore. And that the blurring scared you." She remembered. She remembered saying it, and she remembered the way he'd responded, which was to end the argument on a technicality and leave the room, and she'd taken that as confirmation of everything she'd feared. "I heard it," he said. "I didn't show you that I heard it, but I heard it. And 3 days later I was in a meeting with the consortium's representatives, and I was looking at what they were asking for, and I thought—" He breathed carefully. "I thought, she can't tell where the line is anymore, and neither can I. And I knew where the line was. I just stopped acting like it existed." He looked at her. "I walked out of the meeting, I walked away from the contract, and then I went home to tell you." The steadiness in his voice cost something. She could hear the cost of it. "And you were already gone." The room was very quiet. She heard through this wall the low sound of Lucas's voice, a running monologue she couldn't parse at this distance. The commentary he kept up when he was playing, talking to himself or to Emma or to the general phenomenon of the world, processing it aloud in the particular way of a child who takes everything seriously. She heard Emma's laugh, small, clear, the fever finally receding enough to let her be herself again. She sat in the chair beside the bed of the man who had walked away from the worst version of himself 24 hours after she'd stopped being able to believe he would, and she thought about the specific cruelty of timing, how close it had been, how the margin between one version of the story and another was measured not in years, but in a single day. She thought about the $47. She thought about the soap. "I'm not ready to forgive everything," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Tonight doesn't erase 3 years of what it cost me to survive. And it doesn't erase what you were before. And it doesn't erase the 48 hours where you knew where I was and made a decision about my life without consulting me." "I know," he said. And if you ever again make a unilateral decision about something that affects my children without my full knowledge and consent, you'll leave." He said it without flinching. "I'll leave," she confirmed, "and this time you won't be able to find me." "I know that too." She looked at him. He looked back. Between them, 3 years of separate surviving and one long terrible night and two small people who had his eyes and her stubbornness and no idea yet what any of this had cost. "Okay," she said, "just that. The smallest possible word for the largest possible thing." He exhaled again, the same quality as the exhale in the hallway, something released that had been held for a long time in a very small space. "Sleep," she said. "I'm going to check on the twins. You need to sleep." "I know. I'll be in the next room." "I know." A pause. Quieter. "Elena." She was already standing. She looked back at him. "Thank you," he said, "for staying in the room when Solis—" "I almost didn't. I know." His eyes held hers. "Thank you anyway." She looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she went through the door. The sitting room was warm and small, and Lucas had arranged the board books into a complex system on the floor that appeared to have organizational logic she couldn't immediately parse. He looked up when she came in with the expression of a person checking on someone they've been monitoring from a distance. "Okay?" he said. "Okay?" she said. He went back to the books. Emma was curled on the small sofa with a stuffed animal she'd never seen before. It had appeared from the collection Solis had produced. A rabbit, brown and soft, which Emma was holding with the total commitment of someone who had decided on a loyalty. Her eyes were heavy. The fever was down. She was just tired now, in the clean, uncomplicated way of a child on the other side of being sick. Elena sat on the floor beside Lucas's book system. He handed her a board book without looking up. It was upside down. She turned it over and held it and didn't read it, and looked at her son's face in the low, warm light. His profile, the set of his jaw, even at 2 years old, the way he furrowed when he was concentrating. She'd been looking at it for 2 years, and she'd been managing the recognition of it, filing it away, living with it the way you live with a photograph of someone you're not ready to think about. She let herself look. "Lucas," she said. He glanced up. "The man in there," she said carefully, "he's going to be part of our life. I want you to know that." Lucas considered this with his characteristic gravity. "The hurt man. He's going to be okay. Yes, the hurt man. He talks to Emmy," Lucas said, as if this were a data point of relevance. "He does." Another pause. He moved a book from one stack to another with deliberate purpose. "Okay," he said, and returned to his system. Elena sat with the upside-down board book in her hands and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding things up for a long time and was only now, in the quiet of a small warm room with her children breathing around her, beginning to understand what it might feel like to let some of the weight distribute. Not surrender. Not dependence. Distribution. She stayed on the floor until both children were asleep. Emma on the sofa, Lucas tipped sideways into her lap with the book system abandoned and one hand curled around her knee. She sat in that position, which was deeply uncomfortable, for considerably longer than she needed to because she didn't want to move and lose the contact. Outside, the rain had stopped. Fully, finally, with the absolute completeness of a thing that had been going on so long, its ending felt like a new kind of sound. She heard voices in the hallway. Solis and someone else, low and professional, the ongoing operational language of the security team managing the aftermath of the night. She heard a car on the gravel drive, then another, the machinery of consequence, setting itself in motion. At some point before dawn, she transferred Lucas to the small cot and covered him and stood at the window for a while. The estate grounds were visible in the pre-dawn gray, the lawn emerging from darkness and gradations, the tree line at the far edge resolving itself from shadow into actual trees. Somewhere in there were the places where it had happened, the fence, the perimeter, the geometry of danger now being walked through by people with flashlights and documentation protocols. She thought about her apartment in Caldwell, the cold, the wobbling wheel on the stroller, the $412 in the savings account that had felt, on good days, like the beginning of something. She thought about the clinic at 2 in the morning, the plastic chairs. Lucas pulling at his ear. She thought about the look on Adrian's face in the pharmacy when Emma said, "My head is hot." The specific quality of a man encountering something that rearranges his understanding of what matters. She thought about a lot of things, standing at the window in the gray pre-dawn of a morning that was going to require more from her than the night had, because the night had only required survival, and survival was a mode she'd mastered. What came next was different. What came next required something she was going to have to rebuild from different materials than the ones she'd been using. She was still there when she heard movement from the recovery room. Not an alarm, not distress, just the sound of someone shifting, awake. She waited. It stopped. She went to the door, opened it. Adrian was awake, looking at the ceiling with the flat, considering expression of a man working through something. He heard the door and his eyes moved to her. "You should be asleep," she said. "I was thinking." "Think slower. You lost blood." The corner of his mouth moved. Medically dubious. She came into the room and sat in the chair again, which was apparently where she lived now. In this chair, in this room, at this particular strange juncture of their lives. She pulled her knees up, which was not a posture she'd have allowed herself anywhere she felt observed, and rested her chin on them and looked at him. "What were you thinking about?" she said. "The name of that restaurant," he said. "On 5th. The one you said made the best—" He stopped. Recalibrated. "We went there twice. The second time we argued about something I can't remember, and you ordered dessert anyway, and I remember thinking that was the most specifically you thing I'd ever seen someone do." She remembered. The argument had been about his assistant and a scheduling conflict, and she'd been right, and she'd ordered the chocolate thing anyway because being right was satisfying, but the chocolate thing was also good, and those were not mutually exclusive. "Renata's," she said. "Renata's." He tried the word like he was recovering something he'd been looking for. "Is it still there?" "I have no idea. I haven't been back." "Neither have I." A pause. "Maybe it is." She looked at him. He was looking at the ceiling again, but differently than before. Not working through something. Just looking. The particular quality of a person who has found, after a long time, that the ceiling is not as bad a place to rest your eyes as it used to be. "Adrian," she said. "Yes. When this is over, the legal part, the consortium, all of it." She chose each word with the care of someone building something that needs to hold weight. "I'm not moving into this estate. I'm finding my own place. The twins will have 2 homes." Understood. "And the decisions about school, about healthcare, about how they spend their time, those are made together, not managed, together." Understood. "And if I think you're slipping back, you'll tell me." He looked at her now. "Before you leave, you'll tell me first." She held his gaze. That was the thing, she realized, that she hadn't been able to offer him 3 years ago. Not because she'd been wrong to leave, she hadn't been wrong, but because she'd left without giving him the chance to be told. She'd protected herself and the children, and she'd been right to do it, and it had still cost something that she was only now beginning to understand the full size of. "Yes," she said, "I'll tell you first." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. The same word she'd given him earlier, small and enormous simultaneously. She uncurled from the chair, stood. The window behind him was lightening in the way that meant dawn was real and coming, and the night had finally used itself up. "Sleep," she said again. "You too." She went back to the sitting room. She lay down on the small sofa beside Emma, who shifted automatically to accommodate her without waking, the body's knowledge of the people it belongs with. Lucas made a sound from the cot, some syllable that was either his sleeping language or the very edge of a word, and settled. Elena lay on her back with Emma's warmth pressed to her side and the pale dawn coming through the window and the sounds of the estate establishing itself into the first ordinary morning after an extraordinary night. And she breathed, and she let the breathing do what it does when you stop managing it. It slowed, it deepened, it returned to something that felt less like maintenance and more like living. She thought, "We are okay. All of us, tonight, we are okay." She thought, "Tomorrow is going to ask a lot of me." She thought, "I'll meet it." She slept. Several months later, the consortium's legal infrastructure collapsed under the weight of coordinated federal action across 3 countries. The documentation proved sufficient, The names Adrian had been carrying for 3 years became public record. Brennan cooperated fully in exchange for a reduced arrangement that satisfied no one completely, which was the most honest kind of justice. Carla Voss's custody situation was quietly stabilized through legal intervention that Elena arranged and Adrian funded, and neither of them discussed with the other in advance, which was either the first act of their new dynamic or the last act of their old one, and they let it be both. Elena found an apartment 20 minutes from the estate, large enough, light enough, chosen entirely by herself. She painted the twins' room yellow because Emma asked her to, and Lucas didn't object, which meant he either didn't mind or minded and chose to let it go, and either way it was yellow. She bought a new stroller with wheels that didn't wobble. She went back to work, different work, a position with a nonprofit that used her experience in ways the diner never could. She did not do any of these things because Adrian suggested them. She did them because they were the next right things, and she was a woman who knew how to identify the next right thing and do it. Adrian came on Wednesday evenings and every other weekend, and he was on time, always, and he brought nothing expensive, or he learned to stop bringing expensive things after the first 2 times when Elena handed them back with an expression that required no additional commentary. He brought himself. He sat on the floor of the yellow room and read the board books, and built the soap tower systems that Lucas had graduated to with actual blocks, and he learned, through repetition and failure and correction, the specific language of each child, Emma's directness, her need for honesty even when honesty was inconvenient, Lucas's quiet, his preference for being asked rather than assumed, his deep and serious loyalty to the people he'd decided on. He learned them, both of them, the way you learn something you intend to keep. One evening in late autumn, close to the first anniversary of the night on Caldwell Street, Elena and Adrian stood in the kitchen of her apartment while the twins slept and the city outside did what cities do in the evening, indifferent and lit and ongoing. They were doing what they'd gradually learned to do in the same kitchen space without it being an event, existing, making tea, existing. He said something she didn't catch. "What?" she said. "I said, I'm glad you came out of the room." He was looking at the kettle. "The safe room. When Solis told you to stay." She looked at the side of his face. "You weren't even there. You were in the recovery room by then." "Solis told me." A pause. "She said you opened the door anyway." "She told me to stay beside her. She said you looked like you would have gone through her if necessary." He glanced over, and there was something in his expression that was careful and real and not performing anything. "I don't know. I'm glad you came out." Elena thought about the moment, the door handle, the cold metal, the weight of the decision. "I wasn't coming for you," she said. "I want to be clear." "I know. I was coming to see for myself." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "That's what I'm glad about, that you needed to see for yourself." She looked at him for a moment. Then she handed him his tea. They drank it standing at the counter, not talking much. The silence, the kind that had earned itself over months of difficult conversations and honest corrections, and the slow, unglamorous work of 2 people deciding, repeatedly and without guarantee, to try. Outside the kitchen window, the city lights reflected in the wet street below. It had rained earlier. The pavement held the light and gave it back transformed the way water does, the way certain kinds of time do, taking what falls into them and returning it as something you almost recognize, something that carries the shape of what was and the weight of what it costs to get to what is. Elena set her mug down. She thought about the rainstorm on Caldwell Street, the sideways mean rain, the pharmacy cross bleeding red into the wet asphalt, the stroller with the wobbling wheel. She thought about the $47. She thought about the moment she'd gotten into the black SUV and felt the door close behind her with the quiet precision of something permanent, and how she'd understood even then that the closing was irreversible but not yet what it would mean. She knew now. She looked at the lit city in the window. She breathed. She picked up her mug. She stayed.